Welcome to Daily Life in the Past. Here, we explore how ordinary people lived before modern technology and comfort shaped everyday life. If you enjoy learning about the past, feel free to leave a comment and let us know where you are watching from. And if you would like to support the channel, a like or subscription is always appreciated. For most of human history, people did not buy food in stores, track it with receipts, or rely on big supply chains. Most food came from local land and water. Weather changed. Harvests failed. Hunting was uncertain. Illness and injury could stop a person from working. In that world, food sharing was not just kindness. It was a practical system that helped communities survive. It also shaped rules about fairness, work status, and belonging. This documentary explains how communities shared food across different historical settings. We will look at small mobile groups, farming villages, cities, and states. We will also look at religious and civic traditions that organized feeding the hungry. Throughout, the goal is to understand the systems, who produced food, who controlled it, how it moved, and how people decided who received it. Food sharing can mean many things. It can be a direct meal shared with neighbors. It can be stored grain released during shortage. It can be a public feast that confirms leadership. It can be a rule that says certain people must be fed first. It can be a duty of worship. It can also be a form of power. To make sense of these different practices, it helps to think in 4 layers. First is production, how food is obtained, grown, hunted, gathered, or raised. Second is storage, what is kept for later, how it is preserved, and who has access. Third is distribution, how food is divided, by what rules, and through what institutions. Fourth is enforcement and social pressure. What happens if a person refuses to share, takes too much, or breaks the rules? When people lacked modern police and courts, rules were still enforced. They were enforced by reputation, shame, exclusion, and sometimes by formal officials like village elders, temple administrators, or city officers. Let us begin with the earliest and most widespread human setting, small communities that moved often. In many hunting and gathering societies, the most valuable food could be large game. Large game is unpredictable. A hunter might return with nothing for days, then return with a big animal that provides more meat than one household can eat before it spoils. That simple fact supports sharing. If one person keeps all the meat, much of it goes to waste. If it is shared, many people benefit. Later, when others succeed, they share too. Over time, this reduces the risk that any one family will face repeated hunger. But food sharing in these groups is not only a math problem. It is also a social rule. Some ethnographic research shows that in certain groups, a successful hunter may not fully control how the meat is distributed. Others may have recognized claims. Certain cuts may go to certain people, or to households tied by kinship, or to those who participated in the hunt. These rules can prevent one person from turning a lucky day into long-term dominance. This is a key idea. In small egalitarian groups, sharing can be a method for preventing accumulation of power. To keep equality, many communities develop strong norms against stinginess. People talk. They notice who shares and who does not. Gossip, teasing, and loss of respect can be serious punishments. In small groups where people depend on each other for daily survival, reputation matters. Food sharing also helps handle life stages. Children, the elderly, pregnant people, and the injured may not be able to gather or hunt as effectively. A group that shares can support members through weak periods, knowing that roles change over time. Sharing can also be built into daily routines. Gathered foods like berries, tubers, or greens may be brought back to camp and shared widely. In many groups, meals are social events where food is divided in visible ways. Visibility matters because it allows others to see that distribution is fair. When rules are visible, They are easier to enforce through social pressure. Now let us shift to a different environment, the Arctic and subarctic, where hunting can be dangerous, and where stored food may be the difference between life and death. Inuit communities are often described as having strong traditions of food sharing. In many settings, hunted foods are treated as resources that belong to a wider group, not just one buyer or one household. Distribution can be organized through household networks, partnerships, and obligations to elders. In cold environments, the risks of hunting and the risks of sudden shortage are high. Sharing becomes a stabilizing system. It spreads risk and helps ensure that people who cannot hunt today still eat. Sharing can be organized around both need and respect. For example, elders may receive food as part of a social duty. This supports those who are less able to hunt and also helps transmit knowledge and maintain family bonds. The key point is that sharing systems are not random. They are rules that connect food to membership. Membership is important. In many communities, the right to receive shared food depends on being recognized as part of the group, part of the camp, part of the kin network, or part of the settlement. That brings us to one of the biggest changes in human history: agriculture. Farming created larger surpluses, but it also created new problems. When food is harvested once or twice a year, it must last until the next harvest. That requires storage. Storage creates a question: who owns the stored food? The household, the village, the landlord, the temple, the king? Once storage becomes large and centralized, distribution can become political. In early farming villages, sharing often happened through labor exchange and mutual help. If one family fell behind due to illness, neighbors might help with planting or harvest, and in return receive food or future help. This type of cooperation is common because farm work is seasonal and time-sensitive. If you miss the harvest window, food is lost. So it can make sense for a community to coordinate labor and then share part of the results. However, as farming societies grew, many developed more formal institutions: chiefs, councils, temples, and later states. These institutions often managed food in bulk. Central storage can protect against local crop failure. If one district has a bad harvest, grain can be moved from another district. Central storage can also support specialized workers, such as builders, soldiers, scribes, and artisans. But central storage can also increase control. If the state holds the grain, people may depend on officials for access. Food becomes a lever of authority. Ancient Egypt offers a clear example of food management tied to administration. Egypt relied heavily on grain agriculture supported by the Nile's flooding cycle. Large-scale storage and careful record-keeping helped authorities collect, store, and redistribute grain. Food could function like payment. One well-known case comes from the community of tomb workers at Deir el-Medina, who worked on royal tombs. These workers received rations, including grain. When rations were delayed, the workers organized and protested. Officials responded by releasing grain supplies. This shows a system where food distribution was part of labor management. It also shows that workers understood the system and could pressure it when it failed. In such a system, sharing is not only between neighbors. It is built into the structure of work and state responsibility. Now consider another model: the ancient Andes under the Inca. In the Inca Empire, officials organized large storehouses for food and supplies. Labor obligations helped produce and move goods, and stored food could be used to support armies, public works, and relief during shortages. The general principle is similar. Centralized storage allows redistribution across large territories. It also connects food access to state organization. Another major model comes from the ancient Mediterranean, especially Rome. As Rome grew into a huge city, feeding it became a major political and logistical challenge. Rome developed systems to import grain, store it, and distribute it. This included the grain dole, a form of public food support for registered citizens. This was not simple charity. It was a civic institution tied to citizenship, administration, and social order. Officials managed procurement and distribution. The system relied on shipping routes, ports, storage facilities, and bureaucratic oversight. This shows a key pattern. As societies urbanize, food sharing often becomes formal public provision. But public provision usually has boundaries. It may serve citizens but not outsiders. It may prioritize certain groups. It may be used to reduce unrest. It may also reinforce a sense of who belongs. Now let us move from empires back to local communities, but in a different way, communal living and household organization. Among the Haudenosaunee, often called the Iroquois Confederacy, longhouse life was structured around clans and extended families. In many descriptions, women played a central role in farming and in managing food distribution within the longhouse. Corn, beans, and squash were major crops. When many families share one building and cooperate daily, sharing is not an occasional act. It is built into the household economy. In such settings, food storage pits, shared cooking spaces, and coordinated farming create a system where distribution is managed as part of daily governance. This brings up another major factor. Who controls food is often linked to who controls land, labor, and household rules. In many societies, control of stored food is a form of governance. Now let us examine food sharing in medieval and early modern Europe, where communities lived under strong property rules and where poverty was widespread. Village life often included informal support systems, neighbors helped during hard times, and local customs shaped what the poor could take. One famous practice was gleaning. After a field was harvested, poor people might collect leftover grain. This practice existed in many places as a customary form of support. However, customs can change when property systems change. In late 1700s, England, courts addressed whether gleaning was a legal right or only a tolerated practice. Decisions such as Steele v. Houghton treated gleaning as not a right at common law, which supported stronger private control of fields. This is an example of how food access can shift when law and land ownership become stricter. As economies changed, communities developed other forms of relief. Parishes collected poor rates and provided assistance. In some periods, they supported families with allowances tied to bread prices, as seen in the Speenhamland system in late 1700s England. This was a food-linked welfare strategy. If bread was expensive, allowances increased. It was an attempt to keep families from starving when wages were too low. This kind of system shows an important transition from informal neighbor sharing towards structured local welfare. But even structured welfare was not neutral. It could shape labor markets, affect wages, and create debates about dependency and responsibility. Now let us examine another major form of organized food sharing: religious obligation. Across many religions, feeding others is treated as a moral duty and a way to strengthen community bonds. In Islam, there are forms of charity connected to food. Zakat al-Fitr, given at the end of Ramadan, is traditionally paid in staple foods. The aim is connected to ensuring that the poor can eat during the Eid celebration. Different legal schools have debated details, such as whether it can be paid in cash, but the core idea is that food support is an obligation tied to worship and community responsibility. This creates a predictable, calendar-based redistribution of food resources. In Sikhism, the tradition of langar is another well-known example. In gurdwaras, free meals are served to all, regardless of background. Volunteers prepare and serve food, and people eat together. This is a stable, repeatable system of feeding that is not limited to times of famine. It is built into religious community life. Religious feeding systems have several important features. They often have dedicated spaces, kitchens, halls, storage rooms. They often rely on donations and volunteer labor. They often have rules about who is served and how. And they often create social equality during the meal, even if society outside the meal is unequal. This shows that food sharing can also be a kind of social design. It can create a controlled environment where differences are reduced, at least temporarily. Now let us consider large ceremonial feasting and redistribution. On the Pacific Northwest coast, potlatch traditions have been described as gift-giving feasts tied to status, leadership, and social bonds. Food and valuable goods are distributed publicly. In this kind of system, sharing is not mainly about emergency relief. It is about confirming relationships, honoring events, and showing the capacity to give. Public giving can strengthen alliances, settle claims, and confirm rank. It can also create obligations. So food sharing here operates as a political economy, a system where material distribution helps structure society. This highlights another key point. Sharing can build equality in some contexts, but it can also display and manage inequality in others. In many societies, leaders gain legitimacy by feeding people. A leader who can organize a successful harvest, maintain stores, or host large feasts demonstrates competence and capacity. People may accept leadership partly because it is linked to security. But the same system can also be used to control others. If access to stored food depends on loyalty, labor, or status, then sharing becomes conditional. To understand communal food practices, it helps to ask 3 questions. First, is sharing based on need, on contribution, or on status? Need-based sharing prioritizes the hungry, the young, the sick, or the elderly. Contribution-based sharing prioritizes those who worked, hunted, farmed, or served. Status-based sharing prioritizes leaders, warriors, priests, or citizens. Many systems combine all 3. Second, is sharing direct or mediated? Direct sharing is person to person. A neighbor brings a pot of stew, a hunter divides meat. Mediated sharing goes through an institution, a temple, a storehouse, a parish, a city office. Mediated systems can serve larger populations, but they also introduce bureaucracy and control. Third, what enforces the system? In small communities, enforcement is often social, shame, gossip, exclusion. In larger systems, enforcement can be administrative, records, officials, penalties. In many places, both exist at once. Now let us look more closely at the practical tools communities used to make sharing work. One tool is portioning rules. Portioning rules decide how food is divided. This can be based on household size, on roles, or on ritual. In hunting communities, certain parts may go to specific people. In ration systems, standard measures are used. Standard measures matter because they reduce conflict. If everyone knows the normal ration, it is harder for an official or a powerful person to take extra without notice. Another tool is storage technology. Dry grain can be stored longer than fresh foods. So many societies rely heavily on grains for large-scale sharing systems. Granaries, storehouses, sealed pits and other storage methods make redistribution possible. But storage also creates vulnerability. Stored food can be stolen, spoiled, or misreported. So many societies develop oversight systems. Oversight can include record keeping, seals, inspections, or trusted managers. In temple and palace economies, scribes and administrators often recorded inputs and outputs. In village systems, oversight might be handled by elders or by household heads. Another tool is the shared meal. Shared meals are important because they are visible and immediate. They reduce the chance that food is hidden or diverted. They also build social unity. But shared meals can also be used to mark boundaries. Who is invited and who is not can define who belongs. Now consider the role of crisis. Many communal food practices become more visible during famine, war, or economic change. In famine, people look for stored reserves, for emergency imports, and for rules that decide who gets what. In war, armies require steady supply, which can lead states to requisition food. In economic change, customary practices like gleaning can weaken when land ownership becomes stricter. Crisis reveals whether a sharing system is strong enough to prevent starvation or whether it mainly protects the powerful. Across history, one pattern repeats: food sharing is usually tied to labor. In small groups, hunters and gatherers share because no one succeeds every day. In farming villages, people share labor at harvest time and help households that fall behind. In states, rations support workers and soldiers, and food becomes a wage. In religious institutions, volunteers and donors support feeding as a duty. So food sharing is not separate from work. It is part of how societies organize work. Another repeating pattern is that sharing is tied to moral ideas. Many communities teach that refusing to share is wrong, but what counts as refusing depends on the culture. In one place, saving extra food might be seen as wise. In another, it might be seen as greed. In one place, sharing might be expected only within kin groups. In another, it might be expected across the whole camp. In one place, public feasting might be a duty of leaders. In another, it might be viewed as waste. These moral ideas are not only personal beliefs, they support the system. If people believe sharing is honorable, the system gains compliance. If people believe hoarding is shameful, the system gains enforcement. Now let us connect these historical systems to a clear summary of how communal food practices function. In the smallest groups, sharing often works through daily visibility and social pressure. Food moves quickly and rules are enforced by reputation. In village farming societies, sharing often works through seasonal cooperation, kin networks, customary rights, and mutual aid. Storage becomes important, and households become key units. In larger societies with temples, cities, and states, sharing often becomes institutional distribution, taxes in kind, storehouses, rations, and public provision. Record keeping and administration become central. In religious systems, sharing often becomes routine and calendar-based. Donations, volunteer labor, and rules of inclusion shape who is fed and how. In ceremonial redistribution systems, sharing can also serve political goals, confirming status, strengthening alliances, and organizing social obligations. Across all these settings, food sharing is never just about food. It is about who belongs. It is about who works. It is about who has authority. It is about how communities reduce risk. And it is about how rules are created and enforced without modern infrastructure. One last point matters for understanding communal food practices: sharing always has limits. Even in highly cooperative societies, scarcity can force hard choices. People may prioritize close kin. They may prioritize children. They may prioritize those who contribute most to survival. In state systems, eligibility rules can exclude outsiders. In religious systems, food may be universal in principle, but still depends on donors, volunteers, and access to the institution. So when we study food sharing, we should not only ask whether people shared, we should ask how the system decided, in real terms, who ate. Because in pre-modern life, that decision shaped survival. And across history, communities built many different systems to answer the same basic question: when food is uncertain, how do we keep people alive together? The answers were diverse, but the goal was consistent. Cooperation, organized through norms and institutions, was one of humanity's most important tools for survival.